Steve Harvey thought he was hosting just another episode of Family Feud, but what happened next would leave him speechless, the audience in tears, and viewers witnessing something that hadn't happened in over 8 decades. In all his years of television, Steve had seen surprise reunions, emotional moments, and unforgettable families. But nothing could have prepared him for the secret that was about to unfold on his stage, a secret that had been hidden for 82 years, separating two men who shared the same DNA, the same face, and the same heartbeat. What started as a regular game show taping was about to become one of the most powerful moments in television history, proving that some bonds can't be broken by time, distance, or even a lifetime of not knowing the other person exists. The Thompson family from Portland, Oregon was facing off against the Reynolds family from Charlotte, North Carolina. Harold Thompson stood at the head of his family line, an 82-year-old man with silver hair, bright blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a warm smile that seemed to light up his whole face. Next to him stood his wife of 58 years, Barbara, then their son Richard, their daughter-in-law Susan, and their grandson Tyler, who had just turned 23. Steve noticed something different about this family during the pre-show meeting. There was an energy, an anticipation that went beyond the normal excitement of being on a game show. Tyler, in particular, kept glancing at the production staff with a knowing look, and Steve's producer had given him a heads up that something special was planned, though they'd kept the details vague. "So Harold," Steve said as they started the show, 82 years young. "Tell me about yourself, man. What did you do for work?" Harold's voice was strong and clear despite his age. "Well, Steve, I owned a hardware store in Portland for 46 years. Thompson's Hardware. Started it with nothing but a loan and a dream back in the late 1960s. That's beautiful, man. Small business, backbone of America," Steve said warmly. "And you ran it all those years?" "Every single day until I retired at 75, Harold said with pride. "Handed it over to my son Richard here. He's been running it for 7 years now." Steve turned to Richard. "That's a lot of pressure, taking over the family business." Richard, a man in his early 50s, with his father's kind eyes, nodded. "It was. But Dad taught me everything I know. The store isn't just about selling hammers and nails. It's about being part of the community, knowing people's names, remembering what project they're working on." "I love that," Steve said genuinely. "And Tyler, what about you? You going to be the third generation?" Tyler, a young man with sandy brown hair and an infectious enthusiasm, grinned. "Actually, Steve, I went a different direction. I'm a genealogist. I help people research their family trees and DNA ancestry." Steve's eyebrows raised. "Now that's interesting. So you're the family history guy." "Something like that," Tyler said. And there was that look again. That secret excitement, barely contained. Barbara, Harold's wife, was a petite woman with gentle features and silver hair styled in soft curls. When Steve asked about their marriage, she reached over and squeezed her husband's hand. 58 years, she said softly. "We met at a church social. I was serving punch, and Harold walked right up and asked me to dance, even though there was no music playing." Harold chuckled. "I figured if she said yes without music, she'd definitely say yes when there was some—" The audience laughed, and Steve shook his head with a smile. "That's smooth, Harold. That's real smooth." The game began, and the Thompson family was doing well. They were a cohesive unit, clearly comfortable with each other, celebrating good answers and encouraging each other through the tougher questions. Harold moved a bit slower than the younger contestants, but his mind was sharp, and he'd already given several top answers that had the audience applauding. During the first commercial break, Steve noticed Tyler talking urgently to one of the producers. He saw documents being exchanged, photographs being looked at, and that's when Steve knew whatever was coming was going to be big. When they came back from break, Steve had a different energy about him. He'd been briefed, and his usual playful demeanor had shifted to something more tender, more careful. "Harold," Steve began, "before we continue with the game, I want to talk to you about something. Tyler, your grandson, he reached out to our producers a few weeks ago. He had something pretty incredible to share." Harold looked confused, glancing at Tyler. "What's going on?" Tyler stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly with emotion.
Grandpa, you know how I've been doing genealogy research?
"Well, about 6 months ago, I convinced you to take one of those DNA tests. Remember?" Harold nodded slowly.
I remember. You said it would be fun to see where our ancestors came from. We found out we had some Irish and Scottish heritage.
"We did," Tyler confirmed. "But Grandpa, the test showed something else. Something I couldn't quite believe at first. So I did more research. I contacted adoption agencies, searched through old records, made a lot of phone calls. The audience was completely silent now, sensing something momentous was happening. Steve stood close to the family, his role shifting from host to supportive presence. "Grandpa," Tyler continued, his eyes filling with tears, "the DNA test showed a match. A really close match. Closer than a cousin or even a brother." Harold's hand went to his chest. Barbara moved closer to him, her arm around his waist. "What kind of match?" Harold asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "An identical twin," Tyler said. "Grandpa, you have an identical twin brother." The words hung in the air. Harold's face went through a series of expressions, confusion giving way to something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition of a truth he'd always suspected but never confirmed. "That's impossible," Harold whispered. "My parents, they told me. They said I was their only child. They adopted me when I was just a baby, but they said I came alone." Steve spoke gently. "Harold, back in the early 1940s, when you were born, it wasn't uncommon for adoption agencies to separate twins. They thought it made placement easier, that two babies were harder to adopt together." "They separated us on purpose?" Harold's voice cracked. "We had each other and they took that away?" Tyler knelt down next to his grandfather. "Grandpa, I know this is a lot, but the reason I'm telling you now, the reason I asked the show to let me do this here, is because your brother, he took a DNA test too, and he's been looking for you. Grandpa, he's here." Harold's legs seemed to give out slightly, and Richard quickly helped steady his father. "He's here? Now? Now?" Steve nodded. "His name is Eugene Bradley. He goes by Gene. He's 82 years old, just like you. He lives in Tucson, Arizona. And Harold, he's been waiting his whole life to meet you." "Can I?" Harold couldn't finish the sentence. Overcome with emotion. "Gene?" Steve called toward the wings. "Gene Bradley? Come on out here, brother." The man who walked onto the stage could have been Harold's reflection in a mirror. Same height, same build, same way of carrying himself with a slight stoop in the shoulders. Gene's hair was silver like Harold's, though styled differently. He wore brown slacks and a cardigan sweater, and his face showed the same mix of hope and fear that Harold's displayed. But it was the eyes that were most striking. The exact same bright blue eyes, now filled with tears. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other across the stage. Then, Harold took a tentative step forward. Whether his bout of the pottered, and to next of Ayers. Whether his bouted of the pottered, the subscribe to the money. Whether his bouted of the pottered. "You look just like me," Harold said, his voice filled with wonder. "I was thinking the same thing," Gene replied, and even their voices had the same quality, the same gentle rasp of age. They met in the center of the stage, and when they embraced, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Steve had to turn away to compose himself, and even the camera operators were wiping their eyes. The two brothers held each other tightly, 82 years of separation, dissolving in that moment. When they finally stepped back, both men were crying freely. Harold reached up and touched Gene's face, his hand trembling. "I've felt something missing my whole life," Harold said. "I could never explain it. I had wonderful parents, a beautiful wife, children, grandchildren. But there was always this empty space I couldn't fill. Me too, Gene said, his voice breaking. Always. I thought something was wrong with me, that I was being ungrateful for the life I had. But it was you. I was missing you. Steve gently guided them to sit on the Family Feud steps, the game completely forgotten now. This was about something far more important than points or prizes. Gene, Steve said softly, tell us about your life. When did you find out about Harold? Gene pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, one that his wife had apparently insisted he bring, and wiped his eyes. About 4 months ago. My daughter convinced me to take one of those DNA tests for my 82nd birthday. I wasn't interested at first, but she kept insisting, said it would be a fun thing to do together. He paused, looking at Harold again, as if to confirm he was real. When the results came back, there was this match, close enough to be, well, to be a twin. My daughter started researching, making phone calls. She found out I'd been adopted, which I already knew, but she found out more about a twin brother who'd been adopted separately. And you wanted to meet him, Steve said. More than anything in the world, Gene confirmed. When Tyler reached out to us through the DNA website, when we found out Harold's family was going to be on Family Feud, my wife and I got on a plane the same day. I would have walked here from Arizona if I had to. Harold was shaking his head in amazement. 82 years. We've missed 82 years. But we're here now, Gene said firmly. That's what matters. Steve turned to the audience. Now, what you all don't know is that our production team has been doing some research on these two men, and what they found is going to blow your minds. A screen lowered behind them, and Steve continued. Harold, you owned a hardware store. Gene, what did you do for a living? Gene smiled through his tears. I was a mechanic. I owned my own auto repair shop in Tucson for 43 years. The audience murmured in appreciation. Steve continued. Both of you owned your own businesses. Both of you worked with your hands, fixing things, helping people. Harold, you've been married for 58 years. Gene, 56 years this past June. Harold, you have 2 kids. Gene, 2 kids also. A son and a daughter. Steve was shaking his head. This is incredible, but it gets even better. Harold, tell us about your hobbies. Harold looked a bit embarrassed. Well, I like woodworking. I have a workshop in my garage. I make furniture, mostly rocking chairs. Steve turned to Gene. And you? Gene's eyes widened. I have a workshop too. I make wooden toys, mostly trains and cars for my grandkids. The brothers looked at each other in astonishment. Harold spoke first. Do you use maple wood mostly? It's my favorite, Gene confirmed. Easy to work with. Beautiful grain. Mine too, Harold said. And they both laughed through their tears. The same laugh, the same way of shaking their heads in disbelief. Steve gave them a moment before continuing. Let's bring out Gene's family. I think it's time for everyone to meet. Gene's wife Dorothy came out first, a woman with warm brown eyes and gray hair cut in a practical short style. She was followed by their son Mark and daughter Carolyn, both in their 50s. Dorothy immediately went to Barbara and embraced her like they were old friends. Thank you for taking care of him, Dorothy said to Barbara. Thank you for loving him all these years. Barbara was crying as she hugged the other woman back. Thank you for the same. They're both good men. They both deserved to be loved. The children were staring at their uncle, marveling at the resemblance. Carolyn approached Harold tentatively. This is so strange. You have my father's face, his mannerisms, but you're not him, Richard laughed. I know exactly what you mean. It's like looking at Dad, but not Dad. As the two families mingled on stage, Steve addressed the audience. You know, in all my years hosting this show, I've seen a lot of incredible moments. But this, watching two brothers meet for the first time after 82 years, watching two families become one family, this is special. He turned back to the brothers, who were now sitting side by side, their body language unconsciously mirroring each other. Harold, Gene, I have to ask, Do you remember anything? Any memory from before you were separated? Both men were quiet for a moment, thinking. Then Jean spoke slowly. I've always had this, I don't know how to describe it, this feeling of comfort when I'm near water. Lakes, rivers, even just the sound of rain. It calms something in me. Harold's hand went to his mouth. I have the exact same thing. Barbara, you know I have that recording of rain sounds that I play when I can't sleep. Barbara nodded. For years. He says it's the only thing that settles his mind. Maybe, Susan, Richard's wife suggested gently. Maybe you were both comforted by something similar as babies. Maybe your birth mother rocked you near a window when it rained, or played music with rain sounds. Maybe we comforted each other, Jean said quietly. And when we were separated, we spent the rest of our lives trying to find that feeling again. There wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Steve had to take a moment to compose himself before continuing. Tyler pulled out his phone. I have something to show you both. I found records about your birth mother. Her name was Catherine Rose Mitchell. She was 18 years old when she had you both in Portland. The records show she wanted to keep you, but her family, they wouldn't allow it. She was unmarried, and back then, that was, well, it was different. He showed them a photograph on his phone, and both brothers leaned in to look. It was a young woman, barely more than a girl, with the same bright blue eyes they both had. That's her, Harold whispered. That's our mother. You have her eyes, Jean said. We have her eyes, Tyler continued, his voice gentle. I found her sister, your aunt. She's 90 years old and lives in a care facility in Seattle. She's too fragile to travel, but she sent a video message. Steve's producers had prepared for this moment. On the screen behind them, an elderly woman appeared, sitting in a chair with a blanket over her lap. Her voice was thin but clear. Harold and Eugene, if you're watching this, then you found each other. Your mother prayed for this every day of her life. She never forgot you. She celebrated your birthday every year, always with 2 cupcakes, always with 2 candles. She never had other children. She said you two were her babies, and even though she couldn't keep you, you were always in her heart. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. She would have loved to see this, to know you found each other. I'm so happy you did. You were wanted. You were loved. Please know that. End quote. The video ended, and both brothers were sobbing. Their families surrounded them, hands on shoulders, offering comfort and support. Steve stood back, giving them space to process this revelation. After several minutes, Harold spoke, his voice thick with emotion. All these years, I wondered if she thought about us, if we mattered to her. We did, Jean said firmly. We always did. Steve moved the conversation to lighter topics, sensing they needed a break from the heavy emotions. So tell me about your lives. What were you like as kids? Harold smiled through his tears. I was always taking things apart. Radios, clocks, anything I could get my hands on. Drove my mother crazy because I didn't always know how to put them back together. Jean laughed. I did the exact same thing. My dad finally just gave me an old radio and said, here, destroy this one and leave mine alone. The family shared more stories, finding unexpected connections. Harold's son Richard and Jean's son Mark discovered they'd both served in the same branch of the service, though years apart. The grandchildren were already exchanging phone numbers and social media information, excited to suddenly have new cousins. What about school? Steve asked. Were you both good students? Harold shook his head. I struggled with reading. Got held back a year in 3rd grade. But I was great with my hands, great with math, when it came to practical things. Jean nodded vigorously. Same here. Terrible at reading, but I could fix anything. My teachers used to say I was smart, in ways that didn't fit in a classroom. Both of you found your calling, though, Steve observed. Both built successful businesses using those skills. That's beautiful. The brothers compared more details of their lives. They'd both played baseball as kids, both in the outfield, They'd both had dogs growing up, though different breeds. They'd both met their wives at church events. They'd both become fathers at age 24. "This is getting spooky," Gene joked. "What else do we have in common? Do you like music?" Harold asked. "Love it. Country music especially. Johnny Cash is my favorite." Harold's face lit up. "Mine too." "Barbara, show them." Barbara smiled and pulled out her phone, showing a photo of Harold in his workshop, with a radio visible in the background. "He plays Johnny Cash on repeat. Drives me a little crazy sometimes." Dorothy laughed. "Gene does the exact same thing. I know every word to every Johnny Cash song whether I want to or not." As the afternoon wore on, the formal structure of Family Feud had been completely abandoned. This wasn't about a game anymore. It was about two brothers and their families discovering each other, finding connections, building bridges across 82 years of separation. Steve watched as the two men sat side by side, their movements unconsciously synchronized. When one adjusted his glasses, the other did the same moments later. When one crossed his legs, the other followed suit. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance that neither man realized they were performing. "Look at that," Barbara whispered to Dorothy, pointing to the brothers. "They even breathe at the same pace." Dorothy nodded, tears in her eyes. All those years apart, and their bodies still remember they're connected. Steve decided to dig deeper into their parallel lives. "Harold, what was the best day of your life before today?" Harold thought for a moment, his hand instinctively going to Barbara's. "The day Richard was born. I held him in the hospital, and I remember thinking, this is what it means to be complete. To be a father." Steve turned to Gene. "And you?" "The day Mark was born," Gene said without hesitation. "I felt the exact same way, like I finally understood my purpose." The brothers looked at each other, that same wonder in their eyes. "What year?" Harold asked. 1968, March 15th. Harold's hand went to his chest.
Richard was born March 23rd, 1968, 8 days apart.
The audience gasped collectively. Susan spoke up. "We've seen the baby pictures. The boys could have been twins themselves. Same blonde hair, same expressions." Mark pulled out his phone. "I have pictures too. Let me show you." The family gathered around as photos were compared. The resemblance between the cousins was striking, made even more remarkable by the fact that they'd been born just days apart without anyone knowing they had twin fathers. "This is beyond coincidence," Steve said, shaking his head. "This is something else entirely, something bigger than we can understand." Tyler interjected, his genealogist mind working. "Actually, from a genetics standpoint, this makes perfect sense. Identical twins share 100% of their DNA. So Harold and Gene's children would be genetic half-siblings to each other, even though legally they're cousins. That's why Richard and Mark look so similar." "So my dad's brother is genetically also kind of my dad?" Richard said slowly. "In a way, yes," Tyler confirmed. Gene reached over and put his hand on Mark's shoulder. "That means I'm genetically connected to all of you, not just through finding Harold, but through our DNA. We're not just becoming family. We already were family. In every way that matters." "Steve, let that sink in before continuing. Tell me about your wives. How did you meet?" "Ask." Harold smiled at Barbara. "Church picnic, 1966. I saw her across the lawn and knew immediately. Walked right up, introduced myself, and asked if I could sit with her." Gene laughed. "I met Dorothy at a church social in 1968. Saw her serving lemonade and thought she was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. Asked if I could help her carry the pitchers, even though she only had one and clearly didn't need help." Both wives were laughing now. "They were both terrible at subtle," Dorothy said. "But sweet," Barbara added. "Terribly, wonderfully sweet." "Did you both have church weddings?" Steve asked. "Small ceremony," Harold said. "About 50 people. Barbara wore her mother's dress. We had about 60 people, Jean said. Dorothy's dress was her grandmother's. The parallels kept coming. Both couples had honeymooned near beaches, though Harold and Barbara went to the Oregon coast, while Jean and Dorothy chose California. Both had bought their first homes in their late 20s. Both had stayed in those homes for over 40 years. What about hard times? Steve asked gently. Every marriage has them. Did you both face challenges? Harold looked at Barbara, asking silent permission before speaking. When I first started the hardware store, we nearly went under. The first 3 years, we barely made enough to pay the bills. There were nights I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake, if I'd put my family at risk. Jean's eyes widened. The exact same thing happened with my shop. The first few years were brutal. Dorothy had to go back to work, and I felt like I was failing as a husband and father. There were months we didn't know if we'd make it. The brothers reached for each other's hands, united in shared struggle, even though they hadn't been there for each other at the time. What year was your hardest? Harold asked quietly. 1972, 73. Almost had to close the doors. Ours was 73, 74. Same exact time frame. Dorothy moved closer to her husband. But we made it through. We believed in him, and eventually the business turned around. Same for us, Barbara said, squeezing Harold's hand. Those hard years taught us we could survive anything together. They made us stronger. Steve gave them a moment of silence, respecting the weight of what they'd shared. Then, he gently moved the conversation forward. You both found strength in your families. That's beautiful. What about your careers? Harold, you said you started your hardware store in the late 60s. What made you want to do that? Harold straightened up, glad for the subject change. I was working for someone else's hardware store, and I saw how much the community needed a place that really cared. Not just about selling products, but about helping people solve problems. I wanted to create that, so I took out a loan, found a small space, and opened Thompson's Hardware in 1969. Jean, you opened your auto shop. What year? 1970. I'd been working as a mechanic for various shops, and I kept seeing customers getting overcharged or having unnecessary work done. I wanted to run a place where honesty came first, where people could trust that we'd only fix what actually needed fixing. Richard spoke up. Dad always said the store wasn't just about hardware. It was about being a neighbor. Mark nodded. My dad said the same thing about the shop. He knew all his customers by name, knew their families, asked about their kids. Did you both ever think about retiring? Steve asked. Harold chuckled. Barbara tried to get me to retire for years, said we should travel, see the world. But I couldn't imagine not going to the store every day. Oh, Dorothy did the same thing, Jean said. And I felt the same way. The shop was my life, my purpose. So what finally made you both retire? Health scare, Harold admitted. Small issue, but it made me realize I wasn't invincible. That was 7 years ago. Jean nodded slowly. Same here. Nothing major, but enough to make me think about priorities. That was 9 years ago. The revelations continued, each one adding another layer to the extraordinary connection between the brothers. They'd both coached Little League baseball for their sons. They'd both taken up woodworking as a retirement hobby. They both preferred tea to coffee, despite living in regions where coffee was king. They both had season tickets to their local baseball teams. Tyler showed them more research he'd done.
I found some hospital records. You were both born healthy, 6 pounds each. You were baby A and baby B.
The adoption was arranged through a Catholic charity. The records show that 3 different families wanted to adopt you, but the agency decided it was better to place you separately. 3 families wanted us together, Harold said sadly. We could have stayed together, but we didn't, Jean said. And we can't change that. All we can do is make the most of the time we have now. Steve stepped forward. Speaking of which, I want to do something for both families. Today, you came here to play a game. But what happened here is so much bigger than that. Both families are going home with the maximum prize. This is our gift to you for sharing this moment with us, for reminding all of us what really matters." Both families tried to protest, but Steve waved them off.
No, no. This isn't about the money. This is about celebrating what happened here today. You found each other.
That's priceless. The families thanked Steve repeatedly, but he deflected their gratitude. "You gave us something too. You reminded us that families come in all forms, that it's never too late to find your people, that love can bridge any gap." As they prepared to wrap up the taping, Harold and Jean stood together one more time. They were still marveling at their similarities. The way they both gestured with their hands when they talked. The way they both cleared their throats before speaking. The identical way they pushed their glasses up their noses. "What do we do now?" Harold asked. "Where do we go from here?" Jean thought for a moment.
Well, Barbara and Dorothy are already planning Thanksgiving. I heard them talking about whose house and who's making what.
Harold smiled. "I heard that too. I think our wives have adopted each other." "That's good," Jean said, "because I'm not letting you out of my sight. We've got a lot of time to make up for." "We can't make up for 82 years, Harold said practically. "But we can make the most of however many we have left." "Deal," Jean agreed. They shook hands, then laughed and hugged instead. Tyler approached them with his phone out. "Can I take a picture? I want to remember this moment." The brothers stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, identical smiles on their faces. Their families gathered around them, two separate groups that had become one. The photo captured the joy, the relief, the pure happiness of connection finally made. "First photo together in 82 years, Tyler said, his voice choked with emotion. "But not the last. Not by a long shot." As the families finally prepared to leave the stage, they made concrete plans. Phone numbers were exchanged, email addresses shared. The grandchildren had already started a group chat. The wives were coordinating calendars. "Tomorrow morning," Jean said to Harold. "Can we talk tomorrow morning? Video call?" "What time?" Harold asked. "I usually have coffee around 7. I have mine at 7:30. 7:30 it is then." They hugged one more time, holding on a bit longer, neither wanting to let go. When they finally separated, both had tears in their eyes again. "Thank you," Harold said to Steve as they prepared to leave. "Thank you for giving us this moment, for bringing us together." Steve shook his head. "I just answered the phone. You and your families did the rest. You were brave enough to take that DNA test, brave enough to search for answers. That's what brought you together." Jean added, "But you gave us a place to do it. You gave us this moment on national television, and that means our story might help someone else. Another family that's been separated might see this and decide to search. That's a gift." As the families left the stage, Steve stood alone for a moment, visibly moved. He addressed the audience one last time. "Sometimes this job gives you gifts you don't expect." Today was one of those days. Two brothers separated at birth, reunited after 82 years. Two families becoming one. That's what love looks like, folks. That's what family really means. The audience stood and applauded, many still crying. Steve wiped his eyes and continued. "We started today thinking we were just going to play a game, but what we got was so much more. We got to witness a miracle. We got to see that it's never too late, that connections can be made no matter how much time has passed, that family finds a way." Steve would later say that the reunion of Harold Thompson and Jean Bradley was one of the most meaningful moments he had ever witnessed. Not because it made a great show, though it did, but because it reminded him why he did what he did, to create moments of connection, to facilitate joy, to be present when miracles happen. For Harold and Jean, the gift wasn't just finding each other. It was discovering that the empty space they'd both felt their entire lives had a name, a face, a person attached to it. They'd been incomplete because they were meant to be together. And now, finally, After 82 long years, they were whole.